Okay, so we all know that when it comes to credit card rewards, there are two sides to getting value: earnings and redemptions. And I've always focused on trying to craft the perfect credit card setup to maximize earnings, whether that be through cashback, points and miles, or more recently, a mix of both. But I've never really placed a big emphasis on the redemption side. One of the reasons for this is that I believe it's so important for you to control how you use your points and miles and not let the cent per point trap dictate how you use your points. Having said that, there also has to be balance, because it's still important not to undervalue your points and get a below average or even a downright terrible redemption. So in this video, I'm going to go over a recent spontaneous domestic redemption I made for a weekend trip that I booked to go from Los Angeles, California to Washington, D.C. I'm going to walk you through my entire thought process on the choices that I made with both the flight and the hotel redemptions, and then I'll go over the reasons why I chose what I did, even though this was not the best redemption when it comes to cents per point. For some of you ultra maximizers out there, what I'm about to explain is going to make you feel a little uncomfortable. But here's a fun thing about this. If you think you could have done this redemption better, I want to hear about it in the comments below, because I'm not perfect, and I want this to be a learning opportunity for everyone, myself included. But before we get into what those redemptions are, I want to just briefly go over the concept of cents per point and why that's important. Cents per point is a calculation that lets you know how much money or value you get from redeeming a certain number of points. For example, if you saw an airline ticket for $100 or 10,000 cents and used 10,000 points for that redemption, that would yield a value of 1 cent per point. And for the most part, this is the baseline value you should always get with flexible point currencies. For example, Chase Ultimate Rewards points, because this is the value you would already get if you redeem your points for statement credits or a direct deposit. Of course, there are going to be exceptions to this. For example, Marriott points, which have an average value of 0.84 cents per point using TPG's point valuation system, and some hotel chains like World of Hyatt have even more valuable points, averaging 1.7 cents per point using that same system. And knowing what these baseline cents per point values are is important to give yourself some idea of the kinds of redemptions you're making, but this calculation isn't everything. My approach to this is to try to get as high of a cent per point redemption as you can, but realize that sometimes a lower cent per point value may be preferable, which is going to be specific to your own individual situation at the time of the booking of your trip. So with that in mind, here was my situation when I was booking my flight and hotel stay for this domestic trip, starting with the flight. I'm looking for a round trip ticket from Los Angeles Airport, or LAX, to Washington, D.C. And for me, I'm looking for a non-stop flight since I'm a big fan of convenience, and not having to stress about my plane is delayed and having to catch a connecting flight elsewhere makes my travel experience a whole lot better. I already know that none of the regional airports in the Southern California area have non-stop flights to DC, but LAX certainly does, so that's going to be my home airport. So then the next step is to figure out which airport I'm flying into, and for Washington, DC, the two options I have are Washington Dulles, or IAD, or Reagan National, or DCA. Now in my case, I'm looking to fly out overnight on Thursday after work so I can arrive Friday morning in DC and be able to get an extra day out of that trip before heading back home to the West Coast on Sunday morning. And so the only airports that have nonstop flights with red-eye options are the LAX to IAD route, and the two airlines that fly those routes are United Airlines and Alaska Airlines. So I think it would be good to first figure out a head-to-head comparison of the cent per point value between both airlines to establish a baseline to work with. Starting with the Alaska flight, the round-trip flights from LAX to IAD that I chose cost $306.20 for an economy ticket, while the same round-trip flights cost 25,000 Alaska miles plus tax and fees, or 12,500 miles per flight. The comparable United flight from LAX to IAD cost $390.21 for an economy ticket, with the same itinerary costing 30,000 United miles plus tax and fees total, or 15,000 miles per flight. This yields a cent per point value of 1.4 cent per point for the Alaska flight and 1.26 cents per point for the United flight. So the first thing I want to point out is that these cent per point values are below average compared to the average cent per point as quoted by TPG for Alaska miles and United miles at 1.5 and 1.4 cent per point respectively. But even though these cent per point values aren't ideal, I can fly for $11.20 instead of $400 approximately, which saves me a lot of money. Now I know that transfer partners could have saved me even more points, but I checked all the low-hanging fruit options like Aeroplan and Turkish to United, as well as British Airways to Alaska, and none of these partners had any availability for the exact flight or dates that I wanted. So now that we've established that we could use either 25,000 Alaska miles or 30,000 United miles to do this redemption, what should I do? I mean, clearly we'd want to spend less miles, so we're gonna go with Alaska, right? Well, here's where my own personal situation comes into play. As someone with Marriott Titanium Elite status, I also get complimentary United Premier Silver status, which comes with a free checked bag as well as priority boarding, both of which I intend to use on this trip. On the other hand, I don't have any status with Alaska Airlines, and even though Alaska could status match my Southwest A-List Preferred to MVP Gold, I decided against doing this for this particular trip. With the Alaska status match, if you fly at least 5,000 base miles in the first 90 days, you can keep at least MVP status, so I'll probably wait on doing this until there's a period where I'll be flying Alaska Airlines more often. And since I have status on United, I get at least $40 in value for the first checked bag, as well as priority boarding, which to me is priceless. So I ended up booking with United, but there was just one small problem. I don't have any United miles. So now what? Well, there are two flexible point earning systems that can transfer directly to United: Chase Ultimate Rewards points and Bilt points. And even though I have at least 30,000 points in both systems, sadly I don't have a Sapphire card or Ink Preferred to access Chase's transfer partners, so for me, this option was out. I also want to point out that I could have also booked this exact ticket in the Chase Ultimate Rewards portal for 1.5 cents per point with the Chase Sapphire Reserve if I had it, but since I don't have that card, that wasn't an option. So what I did was I transferred 30,000 Bilt points to United to make this redemption. And I can already see you ultra maximizers out there squirming uncomfortably in your seats right now, since Bilt points can be incredibly valuable, and there are certainly much better ways to use those points if you're focusing on purely cents per point. But here's how I look at it. I don't have any other travel plans at the moment, and I got to redeem my points for a trip I wanted to take, taking the exact airline I wanted, on the exact flight I wanted, and I didn't have to do this trip tomorrow or schedule this trip 11 months in advance. And the price of that convenience and flexibility was worth it to me. And so this brings us to the second part of this redemption, which is the hotel stay. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Titanium Elite status with the Marriott Bonvoy program, and so if I want to even have a chance of qualifying again, I need to stay at Marriott's for those Elite Night credits, and fortunately, award night stays count too. So I'll be using my Bonvoy points to do this redemption, and I want to give you guys a quick tip when you do your searches on the Marriott website. When searching through their hotel catalog, always check this box here that says use points/certificates, because even if you don't have any, you'll be able to see not only how many points each stay would cost, but also the price per night of the room as well, so that's pretty convenient. And by doing this, you can quickly and easily make a cent per point calculation on the main page without having to click back and forth between individual Marriott properties to figure this out. In any case, when I travel to major cities, I like being close to the places I want to go. And for this trip, that would be the National Mall, where there's easy access to the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, as well as the Smithsonian museums. And that doesn't necessarily mean I need a hotel within walking distance, but if there's a way to easily get there by public transit, that would be okay too. And so looking at all the options and balancing price and convenience, I came upon this property, which is the Washington Marriott at Metro Center. This property is on the same block as the Metro Center subway stop in DC, and it's 2 stops away from the Smithsonian stop, which is perfect. So this property for a 2-night stay costs $658 or would take 98,000 Bonvoy points for the redemption, yielding a cent per point value of 0.67 cents per point. And this is not an ideal redemption from a cents per point perspective, since we already know that the average cent per point value of a Marriott Bonvoy point is about 0.84 cent per point according to TPG. So are there any other properties out there that could do better? Well, from the Marriott side, that's when I found this other property called the Westin, Washington DC downtown. And if we look at the map here, we can see that it's a couple of blocks northeast from Metro Center. This property has a much better value if we calculate our cent per point valuation, which costs $938 for the 2-night stay, or 96,000 Bonvoy points, yielding a cent per point value of 0.98 cents per point, which is almost 1 cent per point, and for Marriott, that's not bad. So not only does this Westin property have a better cent per point value, but it also costs less Bonvoy points overall to book at 96,000 Bonvoy points versus the 98,000 Bonvoy points required for the Washington Marriott at Metro Center. And yes, the hotel isn't too far from the Metro, so I certainly could walk, but having that Metro so close to the hotel sounds pretty amazing. And so for the convenience and location of the Washington Marriott, that was the property I decided to book. So if I assess the situation purely by cents per point, it would, for sure, make more sense to book that Westin property. Not only did it have a better cent per point redemption value, but it also costed less Bonvoy points to book that property. But for me, I put a lot of emphasis on convenience when it comes to booking hotels and where I want to stay on trips, whether it be for personal or business. There's something to be said about being in the best location when traveling, and so in this situation, being right there at that metro stop right outside the hotel just sounds super convenient and super nice, especially if I were to be coming back later at night. This is one of the main reasons why I'm a big fan of Marriott properties, since they have a lot of convenient locations, seemingly wherever I want to stay, and there are a lot of choices that can fit my plans. But I also want to mention that the Grand Hyatt Washington is also about a block away, and if I were to book that property at that same 2-night stay on those dates, that would cost me $1,046.56 or 40,000 points total, yielding a cent per point value of 2.6 cents per point. And so we can see that Hyatt has more expensive rooms, but yeah, they also have a better redemption. But since I'm Titanium Elite with Marriott, I'd rather stay there because I could take advantage of all the perks and benefits that come with that Titanium Elite status, whereas I don't even have any status with Hyatt itself. So if we take both redemptions together, here's what that looks like. The round-trip ticket from LAX to IAD using United costs 30,000 United miles at a redemption rate of 1.26 cents per point and $11.20, while the 2-night hotel booking at the Washington Marriott at Metro Center cost 98,000 Bonvoy points at a redemption rate of 0.67 cents per point. And at first glance, yes, I agree that doesn't look that great, but what I want to point out is the total out-of-pocket cost I got for this trip, at least when it comes to flight and hotel, is $11.20. This is much lower than if I were to pay for the flight and hotel with cash, which would have cost around $1,050. So by doing the redemption that I did, I was able to save over $1,000 on this domestic trip. And I want to place an emphasis on that kind of mindset over obsessing and over analyzing our trips using a cent per point calculation. Points and miles are a fantastic tool to use for our travel plans. And of course, we all love a good deal, but sometimes it's okay to just take the trip you want to take and not to worry about how many cents per point you're getting on that redemption. I personally think it's far more important to just enjoy the trip that you're on, and even if you get a redemption that's not as good, you were still able to travel and save money along the way. In this example, I saved over $1,000 on this trip and was able to hang out with friends and make some great memories, and for that reason, I have no regrets on this spontaneous redemption that I made for my trip to Washington, D.C. Okay, so I hope that experience share was helpful so you can make a more informed decision about how best to view cents per point calculations when it comes to your own travel plans. Again, I think cents per point is an important metric for reference, but it definitely shouldn't be the only thing that we consider when we look at our travel plans as a whole. And even though I'm a big fan of Marriott, I've been considering broadening my hotel options with other brands. And one brand that's interested me recently is IHG. So to see which hotel credit card I may be getting soon, check out this video next.